All right, so get ready for a deep dive into UK finances. Today, we're looking at some interesting articles from Business and Accountancy Daily. They're all about inheritance tax, possible changes coming in the budget, and some other things that could affect people's finances.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting mix. It feels like the UK's finances are a bit uncertain right now.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the big things causing uncertainty is this potential change to inheritance tax. Seems like farmers are especially worried about it, right? The articles mention those agricultural and business property reliefs might be scrapped, and farmers are understandably concerned.
Yeah, let's talk about that a bit. Those reliefs have been around for a while, and for good reason. Think about a family farm passed down through generations without those reliefs. That land gets factored into the inheritance tax calculation. That could mean a huge tax bill for the family, maybe even forcing them to sell land that's been in the family for generations just to cover the tax.
Right, so it's not just about the numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about family legacies, the heart of rural communities.
Exactly, and it goes beyond just emotions, too. The CLA, which represents landowners, did a poll, and it showed that 86% of farmers believe they'd have to sell land if those reliefs disappear.
Wow, that's a huge percentage of farmers. And the article said that 90% of them think it would hurt the UK's ability to be self-sufficient with food production. That's a scary thought. Is all of this just speculation, or is there any real indication that these reliefs are actually being considered for removal?
Well, there's a lot of talk about this upcoming budget being a painful one. It sounds like the Chancellor is trying to find ways to raise more tax revenue, and these reliefs, while helpful for some, are a pretty tempting target for him.
So basically, the government needs money. That's understandable. But going after farmers like this, especially with worries about food security already, it seems risky.
It's a tricky situation for sure. And inheritance tax isn't the only thing they're considering. The articles mention capital gains tax might be changed too.
Capital gains tax, yeah. I've heard of it, but could you remind me how it works again?
Basically, it's a tax on the profit you make when you sell something that has increased in value, like a property or shares.
Right, right. Okay, so how does that fit into all of this?
So there's this rule called the capital gains at death uplift rule. It's a mouthful, I know. What it means is when someone dies, their assets are treated as if they were sold and then immediately bought again at the time of their death.
So it's like resetting the value of everything they owned.
Exactly. This means any gains made on those assets while they were alive are essentially wiped clean as far as capital gains tax is concerned. The person who inherits them only has to pay tax on the gains they make after inheriting.
Okay, so I can see why the chancellor's interested in that rule. Getting rid of that reset would mean a lot more potential tax revenue. But wouldn't that place a massive burden on people who inherit assets, especially if those assets have gone up in value a lot over time?
That's the big question, isn't it? It seems like a loophole that makes sense to close, but on the other hand, it could change how people plan for their estates and pass on wealth to their families.
Yeah, that's a lot for people to get their heads around.
It is, and it just shows how all these different financial things are connected. It's not just about farmers or just inheritance tax. We're talking about a whole bunch of potential consequences that could have a knock-on effect on the whole economy.
And speaking of connections, I saw an article that seemed totally different at first. It was about the deadline for making up missed national insurance contributions.
Right. It's easy to forget about national insurance when you're not in the thick of it working. But
Right.
it all builds up over time, and it's so important for your state pension when you retire.
Yeah, the article said there's a limited time to catch up on those missed payments, and it made me realize how important those deadlines really are.
Yeah,
Missing them could mean a much smaller pension when you retire.
definitely.
We're all thinking about inheritance tax and what we pass on, but we also need to make sure we can support ourselves.
Exactly. It's all about planning for your financial future and understanding how the choices you make now affect you and your loved ones down the line.
It's all connected.
It really is.
Speaking of connections, did you see the article about accountants having to register with Companies House? What's that all about?
Oh, yeah. The ACSP thing.
Yeah.
It's a big change for accountants and anyone who deals with Companies House.
Companies House? That's where UK companies are registered, right? What does that have to do with inheritance tax and all this?
Well, not directly related to inheritance tax, but it's all part of the same system. You know when those inheritance tax bills come due, like we were talking about? Selling a business is one way families might deal with that. Companies House is where you go to find out about a company before you buy it. This new ACSP thing just changes how they handle information.
Okay, so explain it to me like I'm 5. What is this ACSP thing and what does it mean?
Basically, accountants will have to be registered as ACSPs, if they want to file certain information with company's house for their clients.
What kind of information?
Things like incorporating a company, filing yearly accounts, that sort of thing.
So before this change, anyone could just top file that stuff.
Yeah, pretty much.
Why the change now?
Transparency and accountability.
Makes sense.
They want to know exactly who is submitting information and make sure they meet certain standards.
So it's kind of like an extra layer of security on the system? I bet some accountants aren't too happy about more paperwork.
Well, there will definitely be an adjustment period. Some people are worried about increased costs, especially for smaller businesses who rely on their accountants for this kind of thing.
It's a tough balance, making things secure but not drowning everyone in paperwork.
For sure.
I guess time will tell how well it works in practice.
Yeah, I think we'll learn as we go.
Speaking of unexpected things, did you see that article about the cruise ship that got stuck in Belfast? It seemed a bit out of place with all these finance articles.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. It brings up some really interesting questions about how tax laws apply in today's world, believe it or not. That whole situation with the ship really highlighted some of the gray areas around tax residency.
Tax residency? How does a ship have tax residency?
Well, that's the thing. If you live on a cruise ship all year round, where do you pay taxes? This situation showed that our current rules aren't really clear on that.
Wait, people live on cruise ships full time?
It's becoming more and more common, actually.
Ah, interesting.
And it raises questions. Are they a resident of the country where the ship is registered? What about the country where the cruise companies is based? It's complicated.
It's like a floating tax haven. But seriously, it's interesting that one cruise ship could change how tax rules are written.
That's what I thought, too.
Right.
This situation has made it clear that we need clearer rules, especially as people move around more and live in different ways than they used to.
It makes you think about how much our financial systems need to change to keep up with the times.
Definitely.
And speaking of adapting, let's go back to those potential changes to inheritance tax. Scrapping those reliefs, APR and BPR.
Right.
That could have ripple effects that go way beyond just individual farmers and businesses. We could be talking about the whole UK economy. So these inheritance tax changes could be huge for families, for businesses.
Right.
But zoom out a little. What would happen to the whole UK economy if these reliefs are scrapped?
Well, think about it this way. If those reliefs go away, it's like discouraging investment in agriculture and family businesses, which are the foundation of a lot of communities.
So it's bigger than tax revenue. It's about keeping those sectors healthy. What are the experts saying about what might happen?
Well, some people are worried that getting rid of these reliefs might make people less interested in farming.
Makes sense.
Like, imagine you're deciding if you want to be a farmer, and you realize that you might have to sell off land you inherit just to pay taxes.
Yeah.
It wouldn't exactly make you want to go into farming.
Right. Not exactly a great incentive for the next generation.
Exactly. And if fewer young people become farmers, that could stifle innovation and eventually hurt the UK's ability to feed itself.
It's like a domino effect, hitting everything from the price of groceries to how well our rural communities are doing.
Right. And it's not just farms. We can't forget about family businesses.
Yeah, they're important.
They're major employers, especially outside of big cities.
Right.
If those businesses can't survive across generations because of inheritance tax, it could lead to job losses and hurt local economies.
It's crazy how complicated all of this is. It's not just about balancing the government's checkbook. It's about understanding how all these changes might affect people down the line.
Oh, sure. It shows how even small-seeming financial policies can have huge effects. Everything's connected.
Definitely. We've covered so much ground today. From regular people and their taxes to family farms and even cruise ships and tax loopholes, it's a lot to process.
It is a lot to take in, but knowledge is power.
That's true.
The more you know about how these systems work and how they might be changing, the better prepared you'll be.
I totally agree. To everyone listening out there, the biggest takeaway from today is this. Be curious, stay informed, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
I agree.
Your financial future and maybe even the future of a family farm or two could depend on it. That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you there.